The Disrupt Education vlog can be found on YouTube. To hear it in podcast form, search Disrupt Education on any of the following podcast platforms: Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Overcast, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or Stitcher. Thanks for joining us on the Disrupt Education podcast. We've got a wonderful guest from halfway around the world from where I'm at right now. I've got Kyle Wagner here with me. I'm just going to call you the project-based learning guru. How about that? We'll start there. So it's great to have you on the show, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's. That was a very brief introduction. I'd love to have you kind of explain who you are and what you're doing around project-based learning, and just basically where you are and what are you doing these days.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I call myself more nowadays a co-learning experience designer. I think just because there's so much misinformation around project-based learning and everybody has an opinion on it. So I'm fine with the PBL guru title. But co-learning experience designer is kind of the most updated one. And just kind of what that means is I'm really supporting teachers and schools in designing really the most transformative learning experiences that are meaningful, impactful, they ignite joy, they're community connected. And of course, you know, that tricky thing that we all have to do as teachers, which is cover our curriculum. They also happen to do that as well, but not necessarily trying to lead with that. And I've been doing it now off and on for the last 2 or 3 years. Is my own business practice, and got my start at High Tech High, which a lot of people know about, and then started a few programs to basically help schools build these kind of learners and build the kind of structures and support and culture that allows for these things to happen.
I am loving that co-learning. What did you say again? Let's say it out.
Co-learning experience designer.
Oh my gosh, I'm totally like, that is awesome. Everybody here, Kyle was the one who said that first. So, so let's rewind a little bit. Somewhere along the way, I think what we bring as educators and teaching people is about like who we are and how we became learners ourselves. So here's the crazy question is, let's unpack your educational background. So going all the way back maybe into traditional school, or tell us about that journey and how you got to be where you are right now, both in a system and even outside of a system.
Sure. I mean, we can rewind all the way to when I was a kid and I used to, have stuffed animals and I used to teach them, have them teach each other, right? That's going way back.
That's a great place to start.
But, I wasn't necessarily didn't know that education was the pathway for me. I have a very entrepreneurial background with my dad, who owns a music school. We talked about this before, I think, Peter, and you also have, your grandpa who was entrepreneurial as well. And so that's always been, part of my background. Of course, the music school, my dad did teach within the music school. So he was partly teaching and partly running the business. And I loved that connection between those two things, those avenues, because I had always had a place in my heart for helping people. And I think, teachers all have that kind of soft place in their heart and they love to serve. And then also kind of entrepreneurial in terms of trying to be always on the cutting edge of like, what are the newest trends and how do we use that within education, and not being a set like, hey, I have a curriculum that I teach every year, because a lot of education was that. And it said, okay, we're going to teach you how to be a teacher, form your lesson plans and so forth, and then just do the same thing year after year. And I guess the entrepreneurial side is that what I got from my family. And I found the two gelling after a few years once I discovered High Tech High, which seemed to kind of attract those kind of people. I mean,
it like when you see the light, it's like, boom, this is it. What kind of student were you, man? That was the question I always like to ask people, because maybe there's something there. I don't know. What do you think?
I was okay. So 2 types of students. I was a schoolboy is what they used to call me. So I was your typical try to turn in homework ahead of time. Study very hard for the test. I played the game of school very well. But I was also a class clown a bit as well. I always used to You make, little remarks here and there. And I always try to do it in an amiable, affable way, so I wasn't taking off the teacher. So I was both making the class laugh, but also doing it in a way that was charming enough that the teacher would appreciate as well.
I see. That's interesting. If I was a psychologist, which I'm not, but I'm going to try this anyway. I'm guessing you're trying to make it just a safe, fun learning space for everybody, right? I mean, isn't that, yeah, right? So, everybody's bringing their lens to a classroom. Very difficult to do with big classrooms and such. So let's unpack the crazy question about disrupting education. What would you change, or as a matter of fact, are you changing in schools to help learning just become better for everyone? And I'm interested to hear about, the different, because obviously you're worldwide. You've done a lot of different aspects, different cultures and such, and maybe unpack some of the differences that you've seen as well, or are they all the same? So I'm going to leave you with those two big questions. What do you think?
Big question. I mean, I feel like I tried to be disruptive without being disruptive, I guess. And that's, initially, I want to go back to where I discovered that at High Tech High, because High Tech High was very much disruptive, but not necessarily intentionally trying to be advertising itself as disruptive. It just put the structures and systems in place. Teachers would collaborate together. You'd have one partner teacher. You had the same group of kids. You'd have 50 kids total, right? And there's so many systems that have teachers have 140 kids. They're teaching across 4 grade levels. They have no time. They have this very demanding curriculum, and they have tests that are kind of driving things. So really, it wasn't necessarily trying to be disruptive. It's just trying to find a system that was more reflective, I guess, of the outcomes we were trying to achieve with students. And so I found that there, and then just unintentionally became disruptive because I realized that doesn't exist worldwide. And, I then, moved over to Asia and, found some other schools. I was teaching International School, and it was very much a lot of the same. They had some, an IB curriculum that they espoused, which was great. It was more conceptual, but, they started getting in the same kind of constraints with, teachers still working in silos, and, the test being a big focus, and parents having that be a big focus. So I guess what I've discovered is that I was unintentionally disruptive, because I think we have to disrupt what the status quo is to really have the outcomes that we want to achieve, and have really kind of made it my mission now, being inside the system and seeing how to change the system. I tried to be quite disruptive. We started a program called Futures Academy at a school I was at, and that was intentionally disruptive. I mean, we literally said, this is going to be the future of education. We're going to start pretty much disassemble all of these systems and structures are holding it back. And I realized through that you create a little bit of the haves or the have-nots. You create like an us versus them mentality. And whereas I think that was great for the students we offered it for, outside of the system, so to speak, we had people visiting us from all over the world trying to see how they could do it in their systems. But I got away from the let's be disruptive, let's be bold, let's be the Wyatt Earps, the pioneers, because you kind of alienate a lot of people that way. And so I realized that really within a system, you do some things where you're kind of, dancing in the corner, you're doing these innovative types of things, where kids are sharing their learning constantly, they're exhibiting, they're working with the community, they're solving problems. And then people start to get wind of that, and then they're more kind of wanting to know more about that. And I realized that is a far better way than trying to say, hey, we're going to be disruptive, we're going to change the whole system, do away with all of these things that we established for education, because teachers who have been there for 20, 25 years, they've got some great things to share, as well. And you don't want it to look exactly like what we said 20 years ago was the most disruptive thing since sliced bread. So I guess that's a long way.
No, I like that, because I think that's who you are. And we had this conversation even before the podcast about how, you meet wherever your client is or your school, right, is at that moment. And, one of the biggest challenges I think that a lot of people are seeing is, I hear it a lot. There is a lot of divisiveness, especially after pandemic, which I'll ask about in a minute. But like, you're a person who is going to sit with a school, understand, and do the long haul, right? Like, we're going to build this. Can you kind of explain your process there of how you do work with schools in that manner? Because I think you're right. Like, a lot of the assumptions are we're just going to change everything, and that freaks a lot of people out, leaves a lot of people out of the woodwork, and people don't understand what's going on. How do you approach that on an individual level? How does that look like? Bringing that to one school that's not like another.
Sure. So there's two ways. One is like you really just sit down, you listen to where they're at, first of all. And this, the second way, which I prefer, is I feel like I've had enough experience seeing how systems can change within that, like through the book I've written, through the a lot of video content that I put out. I basically try to put out the content of like, hey, are you this type of leader? Are you this type of school that really wants to create more student agency? And of course, I feel like project-based learning, and that's my big thing that I think can allow for it. But there's so many schools that aren't necessarily ready for that. And so rather than getting on the phone and talking to every school across the world and trying to find out where their pain points are, I put out, here are some things that you can do. Some of those things, start with a group of just a few teachers that want to change one unit of study into being more project-based. Some are like, okay, we're going to take 1 week off the timetable. Testing didn't happen this year, maybe right because of COVID. Or, hey, we went virtual. We want to make one more dynamic learning experience. So I start to put that on and say, is this the type of school you are, is this type of person you are, but you have some things holding you back. And generally then it funnels down to a smaller, pool of people that are really committed to doing that. So they don't necessarily know what the 2-3 year pathway looks like. I do, because I've seen it, but at least they know they want something that's a little bit different. And so then when we get on the phone, we chat, and I just ask a lot of pre-qualifying questions, like why now? Why this learning experience? What are you hoping to achieve? Because a lot of schools, and I think this, right, working with schools, a lot of schools will say, this is what we're about. Like, they'll put it on their mission statement. They'll say, we are about student agency. And, right, like, and I see you chuckling, we're about teacher collaboration. And they put all these buzzwords, 21st century learning. And you either go in their school or you have a conversation with them, and they're stiff, they're wearing the formal ties. And I just went into a school like that. I won't name names, but I went to a school and they said, this is what they're about. You could hear a pin drop in the whole school. Like, that's the amount of excitement they had towards learning. And I knew right away, well, you've espoused this, but this is not what you're about. So what I'll do is I'll put out the content to at least get people on a call that say, yes, we want this kind of more student agency, teachers working together, getting our community. And then just ask them, well, what have you done so far? And if they've started to make some moves and they say, look, what's really kind of holding us back a little bit is some of these tests, or some of the units that we have to write, or we have these pacing guides, then I try to dig in a little bit about what's really holding them back. And if I feel like it's, a school that really wants this and can work towards it, then I ask them, are you in this for the long haul, or is this another fad that's going to come and go for you? And if they are, and there's been a consistent leadership team, then we talk about, what a runway will look like for kind of a year, 2 years to really do this work.
That is so refreshing, because you're speaking to every educator who is super passionate, and we've seen the one and dones and everything, and we had that conversation. I think that's what sets you a little bit apart, is you're willing to say no to those, and a lot of people aren't, unfortunately. They're in for the quick buck or something like that. So we were kind of having our first conversation. I was like, wow, yes. And that's why you're here on Disrupt Education, chatting about it. But I wanted to ask then, you mentioned pandemic, and you mentioned some like, okay, yes, there were certain, testing periods that were off, and there was a lot of crazy fun stuff that didn't work, and those types of things. How did that change a little bit where you are in what you do? What were some of the main factors that you saw that are the things that kind of stuck out in the overall last year of the pandemic?
I will say that I can't speak for how every kind of school approached it. And there are people in the tech space that are much better at, in terms of virtual learning and knowing all the tricks and tools of the trade. I can just speak from the schools that I served and what I saw. I think it comes down to the same things that engage students in the classroom is going to engage students virtually. I think we had an opportunity here because of the pandemic, that because students can learn anytime, anywhere, they didn't necessarily need to rely on seat time as dictating, what they learned and how successful they were. And then teachers could be more creative. So I could just speak to those schools that I served. Some schools decided, hey, this is going to be an opportunity where we're going to set up, it's not going to be the kids relying on me just to give them the information. We're going to set up some learning experiences. Some of the things I saw is some schools creating class recipe books, and the kids would go interview their relatives and find out a little bit more about their culture and their history, and use that as a lens to understand, a little bit more about where they came from. And, the class put together these beautiful recipe books that also included family stories. So the kids are learning, this narrative writing. They're learning about how to organize, how to conduct these interviews. I mean, there's a lot of these standards that are being covered through this, but they're not relying on the teacher for every single synchronous lesson that they're doing virtually. So I've seen things like that. I helped another school go completely off the timetable for a week and say, look, testing is kind of done for this year. The students have been learning virtually. We need to just get them reacclimated, socialized. What can we do? And so they just went off the timetable, and I supported them in having the teachers come together for project weeks. And it was the first time that these teachers even expressed that they'd done something like that, because they'd been so siloed, and they expressed how well connected they felt, and how it changed the culture of the school to be connected with teachers. And they had students designing. So 7th grade students were designing for grade 3 students. They had a forest that was right outside the school that they never used. And all of a sudden they're like, we need to get kids out in nature. Mental health is important. So they designed a whole experience where they got them out in the forest. The 7th graders were preparing an entire kind of curriculum for a day for these year 3 students. And the year 3 students would come out and they engage in all these activities and these mental health types of things. And so you've got mental health, emotional health, you have teachers collaborating together. You have, of course, you're going to infuse some of those standards and all of these great things that we talk about for learning, but are usually piecemealed, come together in one learning experience. And it doesn't matter if it's virtual, and it doesn't matter if it's in person or it's hybrid. And that's where I really try to support schools, is that, like, let's get away from the fact that now we're online, we have to change everything. Like, make a core experience, determine how you're going to build agency through that, and learn as you go.
Please tear down the silos. Oh my gosh, thank you. I love that, and that's wonderful. We did that at our school for a day. We kind of had, it was a total virtual event, but there was student choice, and there wasn't outside because we weren't able to do it at the but we took like 7,000 or 8,000 students, and it did make an impact. And I think back in my own education, those were the things that I totally remember. I mean, I remember all the way back to 1st grade when we built a kind of a haunted house walkthrough in the classroom, and I don't even remember 3rd grade, for crying out loud. So, but those are the things, I love that. I want to ask you before we get into this, how can people connect with you? What are the biggest changes that you would like to see? Is it that collaboration kind of student? If you can unpack, like, what do you think is the biggest change that you would love to see in education over the next 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's a big one also. But if we narrowed it down to a couple, I feel like there are a few changes that are going to leverage so much. I guess we call it disruption, or just the outcomes that we want to see. And, one of those first changes, you don't necessarily have to get teachers together collaborating, because I know some schools just can't do that because of their timetables. So I think the first thing we need to do is change our structure of how we design our learning and our units, because everyone's designing units, to just be more around the learning experience itself. That's going to drive it. And that would be one of the first changes I would like to see, so that we're not confined to just this very narrow scope of I teach, you learn, you take a test, and so I think the learning experience is one thing. And I feel project-based learning, at least from my background of what I've seen with my 15 years in education, I think has the most potential to make those changes. I think one of the other big changes we need to see is how we report on learning. And I know you're doing a lot of work in this regard with digital portfolios. But it doesn't matter necessarily how you do it, but we need to have a process that allows students to continually reflect on their learning, allows teachers to continually, ask questions around learning, and not just have this one and done kind of thing. We all talk about it till we're blue in the face. No one likes standardized testing, but it's still here, GPAs, that's our college admissions is all based off of GPAs or, SAT scores. Like, we need to have a more holistic picture of how we report on learning, and that's going to really drive change. So how we report on learning, I think, needs to be more process oriented. And there's a lot of great work, and I know you probably do shout outs for this, but a lot of work with digital portfolios and mastery transcripts, and other work that people are doing to try to change that. And then I think if you have those two things in place, naturally it's going to involve some collaboration. So whether that's the community, whether that's a friend who works outside of school and in the business sector, and you're having kids, put together small businesses, whether it's a local NGO and you're having kids attached to that. I mentioned the Forest School, they linked to somebody who had some expertise in developing that. That's collaboration. Whether it's reaching out to the teacher next door and communicating together on, hey, where does our content overlap? How might we work together? That could be collaboration. And maybe it's more collaborative with just the parents. We've seen now, because of the pandemic, education is not something that the school has complete authority over now. Learning can happen anytime, anywhere, right? So everybody has a stake in this. And so if you can do those first two things, restructure your learning experience, hopefully report on learning a different way, and then collaborate and get with some other people, build your network so that you can be supported and in the process.
I'm going to send this to every school board in the world, man. You nailed it. I mean, I love that. And yeah, that's, and you do, like, you have to understand. I think there is another piece there that you've basically kind of alluded to, is the culture of whatever community that school is in, right? So where they're meeting them where they are with all of those things. So there's a book. Let's talk about the book. Where can people, what's the title of your book, and where can people find it? And then where can people connect with you? And hey, you know what? Kyle seems like a great guy. By the way, he is a great guy to go deep into your school. I know this for a fact. But we'll go deep, and, how can people connect with you and understand, maybe get some more help from you?
Great. Yeah. Well, thanks for that provocation. The book is called Power of Simple. And it's how to transform your school, conquering standards, individualizing learning, and creating a community of innovators. And you can find that on Amazon. And you can also find that on iBooks. So that's one way if you want to do that with your leadership team. There's a lot of schools who are starting that as a leadership study to at least build some momentum at their school. If you want to connect with me, probably the best way is through email. It's Kyle Wagner at transformschool.com. I'm also very active on LinkedIn and Twitter. It's at KWAGS, KWAGS SD3. And then the last way is transformschool.com. Lots of great resources there to support you. And there's also, too, on YouTube, playlists. I have two playlists. One's for school leaders, and one is for teachers to help make those shifts, to know what those shifts are to allow for these learning experiences and how to make them.
Awesome. You have a plethora of stuff out there for people to check on. You give a lot of things away to see if people really want to go deep. I love the fact. So if you're an administrator, if you're a parent, and you may be a school board member, and you really do want to go the long haul, and you really mean your mission or vision, I got to tell you, when I met you, Kyle, you were the guy who was like, okay, hold on. Like, this is it. So I appreciate you. And thank you so much for disrupting education in a great way, and helping people understand that, you know what? Those three things you talked about are super important, and appreciate you sharing your story here on Disrupt Education.
Yeah, and can we share just briefly how we met?
Yeah.
Because how we met was a very disruptive way. We met literally through, you share it. How do we meet?
So I'm going to say her name wrong because I'm from Indiana, but Rahid Fatima, 13-year-old at the time of this recording. She is actually one of my previous podcasts, Amazing for Pakistan. We were on like a full day of, it was like a basically own the world as kids in education. I don't even remember what it was. I met like you, a couple other, Heidi, a couple other great people there as well, and a 13-year-old. That's the point here, right? Like, and she is amazing. And I'll put that podcast that we did in the notes as well. But yeah, right. That's exactly what you're talking about there.
Yeah, and you know, if you put that in the notes, I really encourage everybody to go to that, because what you'll see is a 13-year-old, and I don't know the other girl, Nyla was that her name?
Yeah,
the other one
will be a future guest on Disrupt Education.
Future
as well.
guest,
Yep.
Great. She's I think 14 or 15, and then there's someone else who we got connected on LinkedIn too. When you turn over the mic, you give the mic to students, you give the mic to kids, and if we allow for these opportunities in school, because these kids, I think, have done this on their own time.
Yep.
But imagine if these kids are creating their own podcasts, some are writing their own children's book series, they're working in like extensive lab type of work, I think, was Nyla, as 14, 15-year-olds. Imagine if we can provide that in, school time, like what that might look like, because that is our job as educators. Pass the mic over.
I call it getting out of the way of the student. Like just get out of the way of the student, and then guide, mentor, coach, whatever else you want to call it. Love that. Yes, that was super important. And thanks for helping me remind the listeners about that, Kyle. So thanks a lot so much for hanging out and sharing your journey as well.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. And thanks, Peter, for having me.
Awesome. And everybody, thank you so much for listening. Until next time, we'll catch you on Disrupt Education.